Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Unbossed podcast. This month, October, is going to be all about imposter syndrome. And to further research this topic, I interviewed the author, innovator, leader, facilitator, communicator, and mentor, Lauren Valbert. She is actually just wrote a book called Imposter: Dismantle the Stories You Tell Yourself and Overcome Imposter Syndrome. We're going to be talking about the book and about her life. Let's tune in. Okay. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about imposter syndrome.
My favorite subject. Love it.
Tell us, what is imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is what I would describe as a kind of a set of symptoms, and you may individually have more or less of some symptoms, but it is things like having an excessive fear of failure, having an excessive fear of judgment, saying to yourself a lot, I can't do that, I can't try new things, feeling too afraid to take risks, put yourself out there, worrying a lot about what other people think of you, really worrying about other people's judgments. And that kind of thing is what I would describe as a set of symptoms that belong to imposter syndrome. And you can have it really badly, or you can have it temporarily, or in certain situations. But that's what I consider imposter syndrome.
Nice. And where does is this something new? Is imposter syndrome something new, or is this a new word that we are now identifying?
I think it's a new phrase for a very old thing. I think imposter syndrome as a concept has been around for a long time. I think it's become worse in a way because of social media. Social media has kind of made it worse because the effect of seeing other people's curated external lives constantly on Instagram, on Facebook, where their lives look perfect and my life looks terrible, I think has really increased that feeling. It also in business, with LinkedIn, with TEDx, with all of these platforms of people being awesome all the time, awesome. And you're thinking, I'm not awesome, or I'm not awesome all the time like that person. So that really inflames that feeling of not being good enough, being less than, having limiting beliefs about your own ability. Whereas in all honesty, probably the vast majority of people who are on those social media platforms doing those things have an equal amount of self-doubt. They just aren't putting it on social media. Yeah. Although I have seen a change in that in the last few years. I think one of the things the pandemic has done is actually made people more comfortable with being vulnerable about their own limiting beliefs on social media. I hope that that's going to continue as a trend. But anyway, in general, people curate the best of themselves on social media. And those of us who are sitting there looking at, scrolling are going, oh my God, my life is not nearly as pretty and beautiful. And, so that's, I think, has made it worse.
Yeah. Do you think everybody has a little bit of imposter? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In my book, I actually mention a few people who a lot of people hold up as like the perfect, like, oh, wow, they must have no problems in their life. Bella Hadid, very famous model and actress. I think she's an actress. Taylor Swift. There are Billie Eilish in a recent interview, said, I feel imposter syndrome all the time. So I think, honestly, the idea when you are doing something especially in your profession. So the two areas in which I think people really feel imposter syndrome are in your profession and also parenthood. Really getting into motherhood especially sounds like a real trigger for imposter syndrome because it is a thing you're supposed to know how to do. And so a lot of people, men and women, but especially women, I think, because of the pressure, get into the situation or like, I have no idea what I'm doing and I feel like a complete imposter. Yes. And oh my God. But it also really happens at work where you are being paid. You're being paid to be an expert. And so the minute you hit a new situation that you've never done before, your brain gives you fear. And when you get fear response, your brain is automatically trained to move you out of the fear.
Yeah.
So it says, I can't do that. I can't do that. Get out of this. Don't do this. And so it is giving you triggers of the fight or flight response, which sounds very logical of like, oh, I'm just going to mess this up. I shouldn't take this opportunity. I can't really do this because I've never done it before.
Yeah.
In the original draft of my book, actually, I started with a quote from Richard Branson, which was one of my favorite quotes, where he said, if someone asks you to do something you've never done before, say yes and figure it out later.
Yeah.
And I love that quote.
Yeah.
This is what I really try to live my whole life doing, because you never know how to do something until you do it.
Yeah.
Until you actually try it. And the vast majority of times, I don't suggest you jump out of a plane without knowing how to do it. But in the vast majority of cases, it's not going to kill you if you fail.
Yeah.
So try it. But our brains are there to save us because everything feels life or death when you're afraid. And so it's going to say, don't try that. Don't take that opportunity. Don't accept that assignment. Don't move in that direction. Don't move countries. So all the things that are risky, your brain will give you a very logical sounding reason why you shouldn't do it.
Nice. Would you tell us the title of your book and maybe a brief summary from you as the author, like what does it mean to you to have written this piece of work?
Yes. So the book is called Imposter, actually. And it's really designed to help people understand two key things. One is having these feelings that I associate with imposter syndrome, the fear of failure, the fear of being judged, the fear of trying new things. It is not your fault. What accompanies the fear of trying new things a lot of time is shame. I can't, oh God, I'm too scared. I'm letting myself down. I really wanted to try that new thing and I'm too scared to do it. And now I'm a jerk. I'm such an asshole because I can't try these. So that makes it worse. It's a shame spiral. It goes down and down and down. And so what I really wanted to do with this book is say, first of all, not your fault. You have been conditioned by both socialization as well as what your brain is telling you to resist risk, resist change. Resist situations in which you could be judged. That's very normal to feel like that. And then the second piece of it is you can retrain your brain. You can always retrain your brain. You can always create a new neural pathway that says, I am capable of this. I just haven't tried it yet. And so this is really what I wanted to get across with this book, because I have been working with a lot of people in my work, which I'm a coach and a trainer. And I see a whole lot of people, especially women, but not only women, saying, I can't do that. I can't do that.
We were just talking about it.
Why? Why can't you do it? What's the story there? And sometimes they can't even articulate like why they can't do it. Oh, I've just never been good at it. Who told you?
Yes.
Where did you get this information that you're no good at it?
Yeah.
And what does it matter if you're no good at it if you're not trying to do it as like a profession? I think an area, for example, I can give you a really random area, is I'm not good at sports. I see a lot of people, I can't do any of those because I'm not good at sports. Who cares? Are you trying to be a professional athlete? Are you trying to get paid to be no, you're not. So if you're not, who cares? Who cares if you try something and you're not very good at it? That's your own internal judgment.
Yeah.
And so it is totally possible to retrain your brain. Yeah. And so for me, I really just got it made me sad. It made me sad to hear how much people limited themselves. I do have feelings of imposter syndrome of my own. I mean, I'm not, saying I'm beyond it, but I picked up and moved countries. I have changed careers. I have done a lot of things basically because why the hell not?
Yeah.
why the hell not? I mean, I don't really have the bit of my brain that says, oh God, don't do that. Probably to my detriment, but I just don't have it. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to try it.
Nice.
If I don't like it, I don't have to keep doing it, but why not try? So that's what I was trying to communicate in this book. I want to give the gift of why not try? Why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just try.
Nice.
And the thing that we can train our brain to do, and it's a fact, this has been proven, is we can train our brain to build a neural pathway from I can't to I can, and I enjoy it.
We'll get to overcoming imposter syndrome in a few minutes. I wanted to talk about, in your book, you specifically say that, and I'm going to misquote you, but I'm going to do my best to try to represent what you were saying. But you were saying that there are specific subpopulations that feel imposter syndrome more than others.
Yes.
That you have noticed in your research and in your experience coaching women and minorities, I believe. Yes. Do white men have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, and I don't want to belittle the fact that anybody can have it.
Of course,
anybody can have it. But what I see is it's worse with certain populations, and it's more prevalent in certain populations. So, in general, cis-het white men have it less bad. And that's a massive generalization, but it is a fact. They have been raised and socialized to believe that what they're doing is generally good and generally right, and generally, correct. Yeah. And so the rest of us have not received that benefit. So the rest of us are struggling with people telling us you can't do that, or you're not good at that, or all of those things.
You look like you shouldn't be there. You look like you should be other things.
Yes, literally judging you on what you should be. And I think the easy example, the very straightforward example that has had a lot of research recently is women in STEM. Women trying to break into scientific or technical industries. And still to this day, women are being told, well, you don't have the brain for it. You aren't suited for that. You are distracting in the lab. It makes me angry. It is so infuriating that women are simply thought of by men in STEM as not having the brain capacity as men.
Yeah.
In science, which is literally scientifically not true. They themselves are scientists, but would believe a ridiculous thing like that.
And to that point, is almost subconscious, right? It's not logical,
right?
And these populations are affected the most. How do we deal with that concept? Going back to imposter syndrome and the inability to allow yourself to fail. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we got here in some ways? Is that part of like I don't know what it is.
Right. It is, part of it is not great news because I think it is baked into our society. Mm-hmm. That's not to say we can't change, because we have changed, because societally we have changed. Yeah. We are not publicly executing people anymore. Mm. For example, that may sound like a really dramatic example, but it is an important thing to remember. We have, as a species, as a population of people, gone in the direction. I should take that back. There are still public executions, but fortunately not in Europe and not in North America. We are moving. It seems like we are moving as a people in a general direction of being more social, and more capable of being empathetic and living in a society, so being actually aware of each other. I will give you the more recent example than executions, the more recent example of Me Too. Me Too is a fundamental example of how we can change. We can change awareness in a population of people over a very short period of time. So it can change. Doesn't mean the problem is fixed, because it isn't. But it does mean that there is so much more space for public dialogue about this issue than there ever has been before. I mean, it's a decade. It's been a decade basically, and the change in the level of communication around this is quite astonishing. So, I believe that our concept of society having this embedded patriarchy in it can and is somewhat changing. People are talking about it, which is how it gets better.
Yeah.
Sunlight disinfects. That's the famous line. The more that we talk about it, even if there's backlash, even if we go back and forth, that means that things can be changed.
Right.
But it's slow.
Yeah.
There is kind of a trend right now to say imposter syndrome isn't a thing, it's society that's the problem. Part of that is true. The society is the problem, but there is imposter syndrome. And what we have done, those of us who feel it, is we've internalized a societal message, a societal expectation on us. We need to debug ourselves. We need to get that out of ourselves before we can challenge the society. If we are coming from a position of secretly kind of believing, in that thing, we're not coming from a position of strength. And so, what I'm trying to do with my book is not say the burden is all on you and, that it's your problem. It is until you
get it out
of yourself, you will not have the strength of conviction to help society change.
And a huge part, thanks to your work as well, is to, like you said, put it in words and having language around imposter syndrome.
Very much so.
Specifically.
Right.
Because then we can talk about it, we can get it out of it. And like we were saying, it's easier when you have language around it, because then you can communicate with others, which is how we, live in a society.
Right. Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. And, so several of the things that have been communicated around imposter syndrome are things that I very much want to challenge. A lot of people, men and women, try to talk about it like it's a women's issue. It isn't. Yeah. And that is a very important point. When it's a women's issue, of course, it's not going to get solved because it's a women's issue. And who cares about that? It is a many people issue. Yeah. It is especially an issue amongst, as we mentioned before, minorities. Neurodiverse people have a lot of issues with this. People in the queer community have a lot of challenge with this because they're being told they are less than. They are not good. They are, bad. Even if they didn't grow up in religious communities, it's not overt, they still have internalized a feeling of being less than. Right. And so it is much bigger than a women's issue. Yeah. And it's also, unfortunately, it is a thing that starts in childhood. I say unfortunately because being a parent is a very difficult thing already. And I think what I'm not trying to do is say parents are always to blame and it's the parents' fault. But there are things that parents can be doing that are going to help your children be better set up for success in this way. And the extreme focus on academic success, like at the pinnacle of academic success, not just be good at what you're good at, but you need to be the best at everything. That insistence, that could be a whole book in and of itself. Children who were academically successful and then just basically flopped when they left school because there was nobody grading them. There was nobody giving them, like, you have an A now, you have an A. And they don't know how to live because they're not being graded.
Well, that's part of, I think, where corporate comes in, right?
That.
And that's where academics grades is replaced by corporate performance reviews.
Right. But the problem is that you cannot test for corporate fitness, if you know what I mean. There is no objective value of corporate fitness. And so what you have is when you go into performance reviews frequently, you have this very amorphous, well, you're not performing very well, or you need to improve on what to do what, it is very challenging to be in a corporate situation and have a performance review that you cannot act on, that you can't, that it's not an objective measurement. There's no way to objectively measure it. You can say, these are your sales numbers and you didn't make them. That's nice and objective. But in a lot of cases, any jobs that are not numbers based, it becomes extremely subjective, which can really trigger.
And therefore emotional, yeah.
Very much the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out, I'm going to say something controversial, which I also say in my book, which is some companies are just fine with it triggering your imposter syndrome and that emotional response, because you working against a unattainable, very amorphous idea of perfection, for them, they have no problem with that, because you'll tend to work longer hours, you'll tend to overachieve, you'll push harder against an amorphous, subjective definition of what you're supposed to be doing, your corporate fitness. And they are fine with that, because in general, when they give you vague targets and you are just chasing after vague targets, you are going to perform better than if they gave you very concrete but very achievable targets.
I feel that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people do, and I think it is particularly a thing that is done in America, but it's not exclusive. It's not exclusively a U.S. thing. Plenty of international companies do it.
And that's kind of like I don't want to get too much into a different subject, but that's kind of like the quiet quitting trend.
150%.
How is quiet quitting related to?
Yes. So I'm glad you brought it up, because it's been on my mind. The very fact that the corporate narrative they're controlling the narrative to the point where they're calling it quiet quitting, when it's just fucking doing your job as written, is outrageous. It's outrageous. It is insane to me that we even have a culture in which doing your job as written is considered to be negative, is considered to be quitting. And it is a thing where, again, don't want to run on a different subject, but the destruction of the unions over the latter half of the 20th century is fundamentally partially responsible for this, because unions were created in the beginning of the 20th century to stop behavior like this, stop people from being overworked, being asked to do more than they physically can. These were reasons. That was the reasons why unions and labor laws were put in the first place. And then, Reagan and labor laws got reduced, and it's been chaos. So this whole concept of you have a 40-hour a week contract, but we're going to expect you to work 80 hours is a thing that's only about 50 years old, and it is outrageous and should be destroyed.
Absolutely.
And so I refuse to use the expression quiet quitting, and I call it doing your job as written. Yeah.
I love how young people, though, have they're woke on this.
Love it. I love it. I love the fact that, basically.
Younger generation. I feel like I'm young too, but
you are young.
But not as young as, but no, they're super aware of this. Yes. And they're like, yes, I am quiet. Call it whatever you want.
But the thing is that the stakes. Okay, so
there's part of, I think, where we can go back to this is like there's part of claiming back and working on that imposter syndrome when you confront your employer about I'm just doing my job.
Right. I honestly think that a lot of the stuff that millennials and Gen Z have been able to do is because there is a prevailing feeling of the human race is on its way out, and anything else doesn't matter. None of this matters. None of this really matters as much as we were told by the previous generation that it does. You can't say, I mean, imagine being a 25-year-old and the people saying, well, you want to look forward to your retirement. What retirement? Will the planet be here? What are you talking about? It has no value.
Yeah.
And so I'm a Gen X, and the boomers were telling us when we were coming up in school, you have to get your retirement sorted out. And we were like, oh, okay, that sounds okay. And even in our, just in our career lifetime, that has completely, like, who cares?
Yes.
Who cares? My retirement plan is the heat death of the planet. I mean, who cares about this? So I think that's partially, or the majority of the reason why you can't scare millennials into doing these insane things anymore.
Yeah.
And good for them. Good for you. That is fantastic. It should not happen anymore.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, and so I would love to say it's less imposter syndrome. I don't think it is. I think it's bigger fish to fry. I think it's a bigger issue that's on their minds, honestly. Yeah. I think it just doesn't seem that important.
Yeah.
It's not as important to impress your employer when you don't know if the planet's going to be here in 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Or if you're even going to have that job.
Right.
Or if
that industry's going to be there. Or if that, the rate of change has sped up so much that it is entirely possible that the job you have won't exist as a job, as a concept anymore.
But there's also high trust organizations out
there.
And what role do they play with imposter syndromes in employees?
Right. I feel like it's fairly obvious what value high trust organizations can provide for people with imposter syndrome, but it is very important because people still fall into that mindset of management by fear and management by, control. And this is the battle you're seeing right now with more and more people working at home and everything, and that managers needing to trust people and all that stuff. It's fact-based that high trust organizations that really have as a policy that they trust their employees to work and get results no matter what hours they work, where they work, all of that stuff, perform better, period. And employees are generally they're more diverse and they perform better. So this gets into the whole thing of the more that you are micromanaged, the more the person learns doubt about themselves. This goes back to parenting children as well. The more that you check on someone constantly, where are you? What are you doing? It teaches them to have self-doubt. It teaches them to stay dependent on you to move forward, to make decisions, to make choices. And that is a thing that toxic organizations like, because they like to have that command and control situation. High trust organizations allow people to make their own decisions, perform the tasks that they need to perform, and also make mistakes. Making mistakes, I know it sounds very, very trendy to say, but making mistakes is the only way we learn. Our brains are such that if we do everything right all the time, we don't tend to learn anything new. And so making a mistake or trying something and then having it not go perfectly is the way we learn. So if you control your employees and don't let them make decisions, they will stay childlike. They will stay under your control. They will stay being afraid to make decisions.
And that is what also feeds the ego of the manager, though.
100%.
Because if you stay childlike, you need your manager more. There's a trend that talks about the death of middle management.
Right.
As part of the
100%.
This concept, right? Because if people are trusted to do the work that they need to do, then you don't need anybody putting pressure on people to do their work.
And focus, and this is where focus on results becomes extremely important. You should not care. In most cases, there are cases like, I don't know, flying a plane, for example, where you have to care about the way the person does it, yes. But in the vast majority of cases, you should focus on results. What are the results? Are they getting the results that we need? And that is the way to get away from this micromanagement. Something you said really triggered me, and now I can't remember what it was.
About feeds the ego of the manager.
Yes. So the death of middle management is because middle management itself is there to self-perpetuate. It is not to move up, because it's a pyramid and only a few people will move up. It is to make itself indispensable. It is to make itself indispensable. This is extremely important to understand, because the idea is not, it should be to help people who you're managing to move up. They don't want you to move up, because then they'll be out of a job because they're not good enough, or they don't have the ambition enough to be in the top. So it's really to keep people down so that you stay in your position. And with the rate that skills are having to change, automatically, if you are in a position for more than 5 years, you have skilled out. And so if you do not allow yourself to learn new skills, try new things, are doing new things, you have skilled out. Mm. So you have skilled out people who are very envious of younger people who want to keep them down. Yeah. That's what a lot of the middle management is. It's self-perpetuating. It feeds itself and it keeps people from growing. That is the endemic problem, especially, I will say, of European corporates.
I like that. It resonates with me a lot because of some of my generation growing up in corporate. We are the ones who started moving jobs every few years. And we always were told that is a negative thing. You're doing it wrong. Right. It's because you're not good enough. All this stuff. When in reality, I think what you said is most true. It is, we are recognizing we are not getting up. We're not learning new things. People are trying to keep us in our places. Yep. And we're trying to just make moves to better ourselves and move up and find something that we like. And
that's correct. And that's also, I think millennials really have, nailed this. But Gen X started it as well, because we were the ones who were like, well, that corporate structure sucks. Yeah. So we're going to start a new company. We're going to start up. It's also where you see the startup culture coming from. Nice. Is because there was no innovation in corporates, or very little. And so, innovation came from this rigid middle management being like, we can't try new things. Why would we try new things when we can sell the old thing? Hello, So the rigidity of middle management is exactly where innovation, that
goes to die.
Yeah, well, that's where innovation goes to die. But that's why innovation culture started with startups and everything, because there was no growth. There was no way to grow yourself or your idea within corporates, or very little.
Nice. I would like to talk about, practically and specifically, how do I know I am suffering from imposter syndrome if I am not aware of it?
Right. Good one. Excellent. Excellent. So this is where it is very, very good to practice active listening on yourself and other people. And this is also where we cannot do it by ourselves. We also need to help each other listen for this language. So the language is very, very clear. The language is apologizing, over-apologizing. Over-apologizing. So many people, especially women, over-apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Who was hurt from that? Nobody was hurt. There was nobody who was injured from you interrupting. But we do it automatically. Yeah. Anytime you say, I can't do that, prove it. How do you know you can't do that? Mm-hmm. I'm no good at that. How do you know? Where's the evidence? Have you tried it recently? Are you trying to do it as a profession? If not, who cares? So starting to listen to your own language, it will tell you a huge amount about how you are reinforcing. So this gets into neurolinguistic programming. You are actually reinforcing limiting beliefs by saying, I can't, I don't know how to, I'm too afraid to, all of this stuff. You shouldn't police yourself. Use the language, but become aware of it. And then you choose. Then you have a moment of choice. Do I want to continue in that? So if you say, I can't write a book, to use a very specific example.
That I told you about.
Yes. I would like to know what evidence you have that you can't.
Yeah.
And what have you done to overcome the belief that you cannot? If you've tried, if you literally sat down and you tried and you just can't, some people just can't write a book. Maybe you can't, but I want proof. If you say to me, I can't write a book, I want proof.
Yeah.
I want you to have tried and tried and tried. And even if you try and try and try to write a book, and then you end up with a few great pieces for LinkedIn, or you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to fail. They're going to fail there by trying.
Yeah.
So it is very much in how we speak to ourselves and how we speak to others. It's very, very clear. The other big thing that I hear people do, and this is all people, not just, both men, women, all genders. Oh, what an idiot I am. How stupid was I to do that?
Self-blame.
Self-blame.
Self-flagellation.
Self-insult. And I used to be extremely guilty of this. And then my brother had his first daughter. And she looked a lot like me as a child. And so I learned this from a therapist. She said, what would it be like to say that to Emma, my niece? What would it be like to say what you just said, to looking her right in the face and say, what a stupid idiot you are? And that started to change my mindset about why is it okay for me to talk to myself about that in that way? It isn't. So now when I catch myself doing that, I try to phrase it in a way of like, what am I trying to do with that language? What I'm trying to do is get myself to stop making that mistake. Okay, great. Articulate it like that. I'll give you an example. Oh, I forgot my keys. Oh, I'm such a stupid idiot. I would really like to remember my keys next time. So what can I do to make it different? So that's changing the language from I'm a stupid idiot who did something in the past, which I can't change anyway, to what behavior can I reinforce in the future to make sure I don't do that again?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of language and the kind of attitude that we use when we have imposter syndrome, when we are programming ourselves to stay in the same mindset. And so the biggest thing that you can do is to start listening to yourself. Also listening to other people. I listen to my friends and I say, nope, not going to allow that. Nope, I don't want to hear that from you. What I'm hearing is this, and I don't want you to say that to yourself.
Yeah. Is there any physical evidence of it? Do you know if?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I think it is difficult to say definitively. I am not one of those people who's like, absolutely, you can stop having all physical pain if you just, but a whole lot of physical pain is caused from stress. And you put yourself under additional increased stress when you are too afraid in every situation, when you overstress about people's feelings about you, about what people are going to think. What are people going to think that puts stress on your body, that puts pressure on your body. So physical pain is caused by stress. You can have physical pain because of stress, especially headaches, backaches, stomach problems. All of these things are very common for people who experience a high level of stress. So the physical stuff is difficult. It's always difficult to say that definitively is stress caused, but I can guarantee you that if you are putting yourself under that stress of worrying tremendously about failing, about the future, about what people think of you, whatever, you're causing yourself physical harm.
Yeah.
And so it is also a very important thing to start thinking about when I feel like this, when I feel this feeling of fear, of worry, of regret, of envy. We haven't even talked about envy. I feel it in my stomach. I get a stomach pain. That's why when I work with my clients, I always ask them when they say, oh, I really was upset about that thing that happened. Where did you feel it? Because we all have tendency to feel things in certain parts of our body.
Yeah.
So some people, really interestingly enough, when they get very stressed or upset, is they wring their hands. And, I will see them start to wring their hands when they're talking about it. That is because that's where you hold your stress. So become aware of where you hold your stress.
Yeah.
Because what you can do is when you start to do this, when you're thinking, oh God, I really have to get that project, I have that deadline, and
let it go and breathe out. Yeah.
And when you do that, I call that a conscious counteracting action. When you do that, it actually tells your brain that there's no life or death situation, and you can relax your body just doing that.
Right.
So it's also a really good thing to become aware of when stress happens to you, where do you feel it?
Yes.
When fear happens to you, where do you feel it? When worry happens to you, where do you feel it? It also ramifies as you get older. So even if you're young and you're like, it's no problem. Believe me when I tell you, it only gets worse as you get older. So it's better to identify it and to be able to have some ways to relax it now.
Yeah.
In your 20s or in your 30s than it is in your 50s. Because by the time you get to your 50s, it all takes longer. It all takes longer and is more painful.
I think the last thing we can talk about is how do we overcome imposter syndrome. And one of my favorite things that you have in the book is you have throughout each chapter, as you tell as you move through the book, is like you have a lot of exercises that people can do in order to, like you said, release some of the stress or identify imposter syndrome or coping with it. What are some of your favorites, maybe your most popular, I would say, ways in which people can cope with imposter syndrome and or heal from imposter syndrome, if there's such a thing as healing from it? For sure. And it's actually, the really good news is the majority of kind of the symptoms of imposter syndrome are curable or overcomable. There's only some things which are kind of embedded in you if you learned it early enough from childhood, but a lot of stuff can change. I think the thing that I repeat a lot as an exercise, and it really feels very embarrassing, but it is extremely powerful, is to ask one of your fans, a person who really likes you, to tell you 5 to 10 things that they really love about you. And that feels weird. It's goofy. But it is really, really great. And then they have to tell it to you. You have to hear it from them. Receive it.
And receive it. And not deflect. Not say, but you're better. You're nice. Not deflect, not push it away. Hear it. And when that person has said it, you say, thank you. There is a lot in there about hearing from other people and also repeating for yourself the things that are great about yourself. It is a way, again, of using NLP, of neuro-linguistic programming, to reprogram your brain away from only focusing on your negatives, only focusing on things that may not even be actually negative about you, but that are stories, old stories that have been told to you. And so really listening to somebody tell you how great you are and not having the ability to push it away and just receive it. It's very, very powerful. My favorite exercise in the whole book, and every time I read it, even though I've read it now 100 times, is writing a love letter to yourself.
I like that one a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's extraordinarily powerful And it is something that really can dramatically affect your self-love and self-belief. And, so writing a love letter to yourself every week, updating it with new awesome things about yourself that you've seen yourself do in the week. Using colored pens, drawing pictures, all really being creative around that love letter, I think can be an extremely powerful thing. And it is extremely hard for a person with imposter syndrome to start doing. And therefore, the hardest thing to do, where the challenge is, where you feel the most resistance, that's the place of the most work, the most opportunity to work and to change.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
There you have it. I hope you liked this episode, and please don't forget to share, like, comment on the podcast link. Tell all your networks and friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for guests at www.unbossed.io. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. You can find all this information on www.unbossed.io. See you next time. Oh, that was good.